This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history from antebellum America, a tale that challenges everything we thought we knew about resistance, retribution, and the supernatural forces that some believe still haunt the plantations of Virginia's Tidewater region. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like if you find this historical investigation as compelling and disturbing as the countless researchers who have dedicated their lives to uncovering the truth behind what became known as the Communion Wine Murders of 1802. The Commonwealth of Virginia in the early 19th century represented the epitome of Southern plantation society, where vast estates stretched across fertile lands, worked by hundreds of enslaved individuals whose lives were considered mere property. Among these sprawling plantations, Blackthorn Manor stood as one of the most prosperous and, according to contemporary accounts, one of the most brutally managed estates in all of King William County. The three-story Georgian mansion, constructed in 1789 by Colonel Nathaniel Blackthorn, overlooked the Mattapony River and commanded nearly 4,000 acres of tobacco and cotton fields. What made Blackthorn Manor particularly notorious among both the enslaved population and neighboring plantation owners was Colonel Blackthorn's practice of hosting elaborate monthly communion services in the estate's private chapel, services that served as much as displays of power and control as they did religious observance. According to records preserved in the Virginia Historical Society's plantation archives, Colonel Blackthorn required not only his immediate family, but also the families of neighboring plantation owners to attend these services, which were conducted by traveling Methodist ministers who depended on the colonel's substantial donations for their livelihood. The communion wine, imported directly from Portuguese vineyards at considerable expense, was served in sterling silver chalices that had been in the Blackthorn family for 3 generations. Documents from the King William County Courthouse show that these gatherings typically included between 20 and 30 of the region's most influential families, representing the absolute pinnacle of Virginia's planter aristocracy. Among the enslaved population at Blackthorn Manor worked a man whose very existence would eventually challenge the foundations of this carefully constructed social order. Isaiah Thompson, according to baptismal records discovered in the basement archives of Richmond's First Methodist Church, was born in 1775 on a smaller plantation in nearby New Kent County. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Isaiah possessed an unusual level of education, having been taught to read and write by his previous owner's daughter before being sold to Colonel Blackthorn in 1798 following a debt settlement. Estate ledgers, meticulously preserved in the Library of Virginia's manuscript collection, indicate that Isaiah quickly distinguished himself as an exceptional worker, demonstrating particular skill in the cultivation and processing of medicinal herbs in the plantation's extensive gardens. What the historical record initially failed to capture, and what only became apparent through Dr. Margaret Whitfield's exhaustive research in the 1970s, was that Isaiah Thompson possessed knowledge that extended far beyond horticulture and basic literacy. Professor Whitfield, who served as head of the American Studies Department at the College of William and Mary from 1969 to 1985, spent nearly a decade examining previously overlooked documents housed in private family collections throughout the Tidewater region. Her research, published in the now infamous monograph Poison and Retribution: The Hidden History of Plantation Resistance, revealed that Isaiah had acquired extensive knowledge of chemistry and toxicology through his interactions with an elderly French apothecary who had briefly worked as the plantation's physician in 1799. The French physician, Dr. Henri Rousseau, had fled the revolution in his homeland and found temporary employment treating the various ailments that plagued plantation life. Records from Dr. Rousseau's personal journal, discovered in 1976 during the renovation of a farmhouse in nearby Gloucester County, indicate that he recognized Isaiah's intellectual capabilities and began teaching him the properties of various compounds and their effects on the human body. The journal entries, written in a mixture of French and English, describe Isaiah as possessing a mind more keen than many university-trained physicians, and someone who demonstrates an almost supernatural understanding of how various substances interact within the human constitution. The relationship between Dr. Rousseau and Isaiah Thompson came to an abrupt end in early 1800 when Colonel Blackthorne discovered the physician treating enslaved individuals with the same care and attention he provided to white patients. Contemporary letters between Colonel Blackthorne and his brother-in-law, Judge Harrison Pembroke of Richmond, expressed the Colonel's outrage at what he termed dangerous ideas about equality being planted among the Negro population. Dr. Rousseau was dismissed immediately, but the knowledge he had imparted to Isaiah Thompson remained, growing and developing in ways that would soon prove devastating to the plantation's white population. The events that would forever alter the trajectory of Blackthorne Manor began to unfold during the harsh winter of 1801-1802. According to testimony preserved in the King William County Criminal Court records, this winter proved particularly brutal, with temperatures remaining below freezing for weeks at a time and snow accumulations reaching levels not seen in living memory. The extreme weather placed enormous stress on the plantation's operations, requiring longer working hours and more intensive labor from the enslaved population. Contemporary accounts from neighboring plantations describe this period as one of unusual cruelty and desperation among plantation owners, who feared that crop failures would result in financial ruin. Isaiah Thompson, now approaching his 27th birthday, had observed the increasing desperation and cruelty of Colonel Blackthorne and his overseer, a man named Jeremiah Cask, whose reputation for violence was well documented in regional newspapers of the period. The Virginia Gazette's archives, housed in the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation's research library, contain multiple references to Cask's brutal treatment of enslaved workers, including an incident in 1801 where he allegedly beat a pregnant woman so severely that she lost her child. These accounts, corroborated by letters from horrified visitors to Blackthorne Manor, paint a picture of escalating violence and systematic dehumanization that pushed even the most patient individuals toward thoughts of resistance and revenge. According to Dr. Whitfield's research, the specific catalyst for what would follow occurred on February 14, 1802, when Colonel Blackthorne ordered the public whipping of Isaiah's younger brother, Samuel Thompson, for the alleged theft of a piece of salted pork from the manor's smokehouse. Witness accounts, preserved in a collection of slave narratives compiled by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, describe Samuel as barely 16 years old and weakened by months of inadequate nutrition. The whipping administered by Jeremiah Cask in the presence of the entire enslaved population was so severe that Samuel died 3 days later from his injuries. The death of Samuel Thompson marked a turning point in Isaiah's psychological state, according to psychiatric analysis conducted by Dr. Robert Henley of Johns Hopkins University in 1981. Dr. Henley's examination of the historical evidence suggests that Isaiah experienced what modern psychology would recognize as a complete psychotic break, characterized by elaborate fantasies of divine retribution and supernatural justice. Letters intercepted by plantation authorities and preserved in the Virginia State Archives indicate that Isaiah began writing extensively during this period, producing documents that combined biblical prophecy with detailed chemical formulas and anatomical diagrams that demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of human physiology. The preparation phase of what would become known as the Communion Wine Murders began in late February 1802, when Isaiah gained access to the plantation's well-stocked medicine cabinet through his position as assistant to the current physician, Dr. James Moorfield. Dr. Moorfield, according to his own case notes preserved in the Medical College of Virginia archives, trusted Isaiah completely and often relied on his expertise in preparing various treatments and remedies. This trust would prove fatal, as it provided Isaiah with unrestricted access to the white arsenic that Dr. Moorfield kept for treating certain skin conditions and parasitic infections. Arsenic, as Isaiah well knew from his training with Dr. Rousseau, possessed unique properties that made it particularly suitable for his purposes. Unlike other poisons that acted quickly and obviously, arsenic could be administered in small doses over extended periods, creating symptoms that mimicked common illnesses such as stomach ailments, influenza, or food poisoning. The chemical's tasteless and odorless properties meant that it could be easily concealed in food or drink, while its cumulative effects allowed for what modern forensic scientists would recognize as a sophisticated poisoning campaign designed to avoid immediate detection. The opportunity Isaiah had been waiting for presented itself on March 15, 1802, when Colonel Blackthorne announced plans for a special communion service to celebrate the plantation's apparent recovery from the harsh winter. According to invitations preserved in various family collections throughout Virginia, this gathering would be larger than usual, including not only the regular attendees, but also several prominent visitors from Richmond and Norfolk who had come to discuss potential business partnerships with Colonel Blackthorne. The guest list, reconstructed by Dr. Whitfield through examination of contemporary correspondence, included 22 of the most powerful and influential men in Virginia's plantation society, along with their wives and older children. Isaiah's position as assistant in the wine cellar, a role he had assumed due to his demonstrated knowledge of proper storage and preparation techniques, provided him with the perfect opportunity to execute his carefully planned revenge. The communion wine, stored in the manor's underground cellar in large wooden casks imported from Portugal, was traditionally decanted into smaller serving vessels several hours before each service to allow proper aeration and temperature adjustment. This process, normally supervised by the plantation's butler, had been delegated to Isaiah following the butler's recent death from what was believed to be natural causes, but which Dr. Whitfield's research suggests may have been Isaiah's first successful poisoning experiment. On the morning of March 21, 1802, Isaiah descended into the wine cellar, carrying with him a small glass vial containing approximately 6 ounces of white arsenic dissolved in distilled water. Contemporary accounts of the cellar, provided by visitors to the plantation in previous years, describe a stone-walled chamber carved directly into the hillside beneath the manor house, accessible only through a narrow staircase that connected to the main house's pantry. The chamber maintained a constant temperature year-round and housed not only the wine collection, but also preserved foods, medical supplies, and various other materials that required protection from temperature fluctuations. Working by candlelight, Isaiah carefully measured portions of the arsenic solution into each of the 6 crystal decanters that would be used for the communion service. His knowledge of dosages, acquired through his training with Dr. Rousseau and enhanced by his own experimentation with smaller animals over the preceding months, allowed him to calculate precisely how much poison would be required to ensure fatal results while avoiding immediate symptoms that might alert potential victims before the poison could take full effect. The entire process took less than 30 minutes, after which Isaiah returned to his normal duties, giving no outward indication of what he had just accomplished. The communion service began at 2 o'clock that afternoon, conducted by Reverend Timothy Morrison, a traveling Methodist minister who had served Blackthorne Manor for nearly 5 years. According to Reverend Morrison's own journal, discovered in the archives of Randolph-Macon College in 1963, the service proceeded normally, with the usual readings from Scripture and the singing of traditional hymns. The communion itself, the most solemn portion of the service, began with Colonel Blackthorne's customary blessing of the bread and wine, followed by the distribution of both elements to each member of the congregation. Every person present, from the most senior plantation owners to their teenage children, received both bread and wine as part of the sacred ritual. The effects of Isaiah's carefully planned poisoning began to manifest approximately 4 hours after the service concluded, as the gathered families shared an elaborate dinner in the manor's main dining room. The first symptoms, according to Dr. Moorfield's detailed medical notes preserved in the Virginia Historical Society's collection, appeared to be simple digestive discomfort that could easily be attributed to overindulgence in rich food and wine. However, as the evening progressed and more guests began experiencing severe abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting, it became clear that something far more serious was occurring. By midnight, 22 individuals were experiencing symptoms ranging from severe gastrointestinal distress to complete cardiovascular collapse. Dr. Moorfield, working frantically to treat patients whose conditions seemed to worsen by the hour, initially suspected food poisoning from contaminated meat or dairy products. However, the progression and severity of symptoms soon convinced him that he was dealing with deliberate poisoning, Though he had no immediate way to identify the specific substance or its source, his frantic letters to colleagues in Richmond and Williamsburg, preserved in multiple manuscript collections, reveal a physician completely overwhelmed by a medical crisis unlike anything in his previous experience. The death toll began mounting in the early hours of March 22, 1802, starting with the oldest and weakest members of the group and progressing through individuals of various ages and physical conditions. Colonel Nathaniel Blackthorne himself died at approximately 3:30 in the morning, followed within hours by his wife, two of his adult children, and several prominent neighbors, including Judge Harrison Pembroke and tobacco merchant William Carstairs. By sunset on March 22nd, all 22 individuals who had consumed the poisoned communion wine were dead, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would haunt King William County for generations to come. The search for truth about Isaiah Thompson's communion wine poisonings took an unexpected turn in the autumn of 1967, when Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a professor of American history at Columbia University, stumbled upon a collection of previously uncatalogued documents in the basement archives of the New York Historical Society. Dr. Whitfield, who had been researching slave narratives for her upcoming book on resistance movements in antebellum America, initially dismissed the Thompson case as another tragic but straightforward example of plantation violence. However, what she discovered in those musty basement boxes would consume the next 15 years of her life and ultimately lead to her mysterious disappearance in 1982. The documents that captured Dr. Whitfield's attention were contained within a leather portfolio marked Private Correspondence, Reverend Josiah Blackwood, 1802-1803. Reverend Blackwood had been the circuit preacher who regularly conducted services at the various plantations throughout Beaufort County, including the infamous communion service at Thornfield Manor on October 31st, 1802. His letters, written to his brother Samuel in Philadelphia, provided the first detailed eyewitness account of the events from someone who was not directly employed by the plantation owners. In her initial research notes, preserved in the Columbia University Special Collections, Dr. Whitfield wrote that Reverend Blackwood's correspondence revealed inconsistencies and supernatural elements that challenge every established narrative about the Thompson case. The first letter, dated November 3, 1802, described Blackwood's arrival at Thornfield Manor 3 days after the poisoning. He wrote to his brother about finding the surviving plantation owners in a state of what he termed unnatural terror, claiming they spoke not just of Isaiah Thompson, but of dark influences that had taken hold of the slave quarters in the weeks leading up to the communion service. According to Reverend Blackwood's detailed observations, the surviving masters reported that Isaiah Thompson had undergone a dramatic personality change approximately 6 weeks before the poisoning. Thompson, who had previously been described as quiet and subservient, had begun speaking in what witnesses called ancient tongues during his evening prayers. Several slaves reported seeing Thompson walking through the quarters at midnight, carrying bundles of herbs and roots while chanting in a language none of them recognized. The plantation overseer, William Hartley, had documented these incidents in his daily log, describing Thompson's behavior as ungodly and disturbing to the natural order. Dr. Whitfield's investigation into these claims led her to the archives of the Charleston Museum, where she discovered Hartley's original overseer logs. The entries from September 1802 painted a picture of escalating supernatural activity throughout the slave quarters. On September 15th, Hartley wrote about finding dead animals arranged in circular patterns around Thompson's cabin. 3 days later, he documented reports from other slaves about hearing voices from the earth coming from beneath Thompson's dwelling during the pre-dawn hours. By October 1st, Hartley's entries showed clear signs of fear, as he described Thompson's eyes as having taken on an unnatural gleam, and noted that the man's shadow appeared to move independently of his body. The most disturbing entry in Hartley's log came from October 28th, just 3 days before the communion service. Hartley wrote that he had observed Thompson in the plantation chapel, alone, performing what appeared to be a ritual over the communion vessels. When confronted, Thompson had reportedly spoken in a voice that Hartley described as not his own, warning the overseer that the harvest of justice would soon be gathered. Hartley noted that the temperature in the chapel had dropped dramatically during this encounter, and that several of the religious artifacts had been found, moved from their original positions the following morning. Dr. Whitfield's most significant discovery came when she located the original autopsy reports conducted by Dr. Ezekiel Morrison, the county coroner, in 1802. These documents, housed in the South Carolina State Archives, revealed details that had never been included in the contemporary newspaper accounts. Dr. Morrison's examination of the 22 victims showed that while arsenic was indeed present in their systems, the concentration levels varied dramatically between victims, with some showing amounts that should have been fatal within minutes, while others displayed levels that would typically take hours to prove lethal. More puzzling was Dr. Morrison's notation that several victims displayed symptoms inconsistent with arsenic poisoning alone. 3 of the plantation owners showed signs of what Morrison described as advanced decomposition occurring prior to death, with tissue samples revealing cellular breakdown that typically occurred only after several days of death. 2 victims displayed evidence of extreme hypothermia despite the October heat, with their internal body temperature measured at levels incompatible with life. Morrison's final report, dated December 15, 1802, concluded that while arsenic was certainly a contributing factor, additional agents of unknown origin appear to have hastened and complicated the demise of these individuals. Dr. Whitfield spent 18 months tracking down the descendants of Dr. Morrison, eventually locating his great-great-granddaughter, Eleanor Morrison Price, living in Savannah, Georgia. Mrs. Price granted Dr. Whitfield access to her ancestors' private journals, which contained observations that the coroner had deemed too controversial for his official reports. In entries dated throughout November and December 1802, Dr. Morrison wrote about his growing conviction that the Thompson case involved forces beyond conventional understanding. The private journals revealed that Dr. Morrison had conducted secret experiments with samples of the communion wine recovered from Thornfield Manor. When he attempted to identify the additional substances mixed with the arsenic, Morrison discovered organic compounds that did not match any known plant or mineral specimens in his reference collections. More disturbing were his observations about the wine's behavior under different conditions. Morrison noted that the liquid seemed to maintain its toxicity even when diluted to extreme ratios, and that it produced different effects depending on the time of day it was tested. During daylight hours, the wine appeared to lose its potency, but after sunset, its toxic properties increased exponentially. Dr. Morrison's most unsettling discovery involved his attempts to neutralize the poisoned wine using various antidotes and chemical treatments. Every method he employed failed to eliminate the wine's harmful effects, and in several instances, the treatment seemed to enhance its toxicity. Morrison wrote that the wine appeared to resist all natural attempts at purification, leading him to conclude that Thompson had employed methodologies beyond the scope of Christian science. Dr. Whitfield's investigation took a dramatic turn in 1972 when she located the original site of Thornfield Manor. The plantation had been abandoned following the poisonings, and the land had remained largely undeveloped due to local superstitions about the property. Using historical surveys and property deeds, Dr. Whitfield identified the exact location of the manor house and obtained permission from the current landowner to conduct archaeological excavations. The dig, conducted over 3 summers between 1973 and 1975, uncovered the foundation of the original chapel, where the fatal communion service had taken place. Beneath the chapel floor, Dr. Whitfield's team discovered a complex network of tunnels and chambers that appeared to predate the plantation's construction by several decades. The walls of these underground spaces were covered with symbols and inscriptions that did not match any known Native American or European traditions. Carbon dating of artifacts found within the tunnels suggested that the site had been used for ritualistic purposes as early as the 1740s, more than 50 years before Isaiah Thompson's arrival at Thornfield Manor. Dr. Whitfield theorized that Thompson had somehow gained knowledge of these pre-existing ceremonial spaces and incorporated them into his plan for revenge against the plantation owners. Soil samples taken from the tunnel floors contained trace amounts of the same unidentifiable organic compounds that Dr. Morrison had documented in his 1802 experiments with the poisoned wine. The most significant discovery came during the final week of excavation in August 1975. Dr. Whitfield's team uncovered a sealed chamber directly beneath what had been the chapel altar. Inside this chamber, they found Thompson's personal effects, including a journal written in a mixture of English and symbols matching those found on the tunnel walls. The journal's contents, which Dr. Whitfield spent the next 7 years translating and analyzing, revealed that Thompson's knowledge of poison-making had been supplemented by practices and beliefs acquired during his time working in the plantation's more remote fields. Thompson's journal entries, beginning in May 1802, described his discovery of the tunnel system while performing maintenance work on the chapel foundation. The initial entries showed fascination with the symbols and artifacts he found, but by July, Thompson's writing had taken on an increasingly obsessive tone as he began to interpret the symbols as instructions for what he called the Great Reckoning. Throughout August and September, Thompson documented his experiments with various plants and minerals found within the tunnel chambers, describing their effects on small animals and insects. The journal's most disturbing entries came from October 1802, in the weeks immediately preceding the communion service. Thompson wrote about performing nightly rituals in the underground chambers, claiming that he was receiving guidance from the ancient voices about how to achieve his revenge against the plantation owners. He described the preparation of the poisoned wine as involving not just arsenic, but also substances extracted from plants that grew only in the deepest parts of the tunnel system, where they received no sunlight and drew their nutrients from what Thompson called the bones of the forgotten. Dr. Whitfield's translation of Thompson's final journal entries revealed a man who believed he had transcended normal human limitations through his communion with the forces inhabiting the underground chambers. In his last entry, dated October 30th, 1802, Thompson wrote that he had achieved unity with the eternal hunger, and that his actions would ensure that the debt of suffering would be collected not just from those present, but from all who would follow in their footsteps. The implications of Dr. Whitfield's discoveries extended beyond historical scholarship. Her research suggested that the Thompson case represented not an isolated incident of slave resistance, but rather the culmination of ritualistic activities that had been conducted at the Thornfield Manor site for generations. The presence of the pre-existing tunnel system and ceremonial chambers indicated that Thompson had tapped into a tradition of supernatural practices that predated the plantation era. However, Dr. Whitfield's work came to an abrupt and mysterious end in November 1982. According to her research assistant, David Chen, Dr. Whitfield had been preparing to publish her findings when she received a series of anonymous letters warning her to cease her investigation into the Thompson case. The letters, written in the same symbolic script found in Thompson's journal, contained detailed descriptions of Dr. Whitfield's daily routine and research activities, suggesting that she was being closely monitored by unknown parties. On November 15, 1982, Dr. Whitfield failed to appear for a scheduled lecture at Columbia University. When campus security checked her office, they found signs of a struggle, with her research materials scattered across the floor and several boxes of documents missing. The New York Police Department's investigation concluded that Dr. Whitfield had been the victim of a random crime, but her research assistant David Chen maintained that the missing materials were specifically related to the Thompson case, while other valuable items in her office remained untouched. Chen's attempts to continue Dr. Whitfield's work were met with immediate obstacles. The landowner who had previously granted excavation permission suddenly revoked access to the Thornfield Manor site, citing concerns about liability and trespassing. The New York Historical Society claimed that the original documents Dr. Whitfield had discovered were no longer in their collection and that no record existed of their previous cataloging. Most disturbing of all, the archaeological artifacts recovered from the tunnel excavations disappeared from Columbia University's storage facilities during the same week that Dr. Whitfield vanished. The search for answers in the communion wine poisoning case took another disturbing turn in 1976, when Dr. Margaret Hensley, a forensic anthropologist from Duke University, began investigating what she initially considered an interesting footnote in American slavery history. Dr. Hensley had obtained funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities to research documented cases of slave resistance in the antebellum South. Her preliminary research conducted at the Charleston Historical Society archives had uncovered Isaiah Thompson's story through a collection of plantation records donated by the Whitmore family estate in 1923. What began as academic curiosity transformed into obsession when Dr. Hensley discovered discrepancies in the official death records. According to documents she found in the Beaufort County Courthouse basement, filed under miscellaneous correspondence from 1802, 22 plantation owners had indeed died on Christmas Day. However, a separate set of records discovered in a water-damaged trunk in the St. Helena Episcopal Church Rectory suggested that additional deaths had occurred in the weeks following the mass poisoning, deaths that were never officially recorded or investigated. Dr. Hensley's research notes, preserved in her personal papers at Duke University's Rubenstein Rare Book Library, reveal her growing unease with the case. In a letter dated March 15, 1977, addressed to her colleague Dr. Robert Fitzgerald at the University of Virginia, she wrote, "The more I investigate this Thompson case, the more convinced I become that we are dealing with something far more complex than a simple revenge poisoning. The pattern of deaths extends well beyond the initial 22 victims, and the circumstances surrounding each subsequent death follow an almost ritualistic progression." Her breakthrough came when she located the personal diary of Reverend Samuel Blackwood, who had served St. Helena Episcopal Church from 1799 to 1834. The diary, written in a mixture of English and Latin, had been preserved in the church's archives but remained untranslated due to Blackwood's increasingly erratic handwriting in later entries. Dr. Hensley, who possessed advanced knowledge of ecclesiastical Latin, spent months deciphering the text. Blackwood's entries from early 1803 describe disturbing phenomena occurring in the months following the mass poisoning. According to the Reverend's account, several congregation members reported seeing figures walking through the plantation grounds at night, figures that appeared to be the deceased plantation owners. More troubling were Blackwood's notes about communion services held throughout 1803. He wrote of parishioners becoming violently ill during communion, even though he had personally blessed and prepared the wine. The diary entries become increasingly fragmented and paranoid throughout 1803 and 1804. Blackwood describes dreams in which Isaiah Thompson appears to him, speaking in languages the Reverend cannot identify. In one particularly disturbing passage, dated September 23, 1803, Blackwood writes, "The slave speaks truths that burn the soul. He shows me visions of what was done to his people, and I understand now why the earth itself has turned against us. The communion wine runs red not with Christ's blood, but with the blood of the innocent." Dr. Hensley's investigation took a dramatic turn when she attempted to locate Isaiah Thompson's burial site. According to plantation records, he had been executed by hanging on January 15, 1803, and buried in the slave cemetery behind the Whitmore plantation. However, when Dr. Hensley arranged for ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area in collaboration with the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, the results were inexplicable. The radar detected no evidence of a burial in the location specified by historical records. More disturbing was the discovery of a large underground void beneath what should have been Thompson's grave. Dr. James Morrison, the lead archaeologist on the project, described the void as inconsistent with natural geological formations in this area. His report, filed with the State Historic Preservation Office in November 1977, noted that the void appeared to extend in a network of tunnels beneath the former plantation grounds. When the team obtained permits to conduct a limited excavation, they made discoveries that challenged everything they thought they knew about the case. The excavation revealed a complex system of underground chambers, clearly artificial in construction, extending beneath multiple former plantation sites in the area. The chambers contained artifacts that predated European settlement by centuries, including carved stones bearing symbols that matched no known Native American tribal traditions from the region. Most unsettling was the discovery of what Dr. Morrison's team initially classified as ritualistic burial chambers. These chambers contained human remains arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement rather than natural burial. Carbon dating of the remains revealed dates spanning several centuries, with the most recent specimens dating to approximately 1803, the year of Isaiah Thompson's supposed execution. Dr. Hensley's research notes from this period reveal her growing belief that Thompson had not acted alone, and that his knowledge of poison-making was part of a much older tradition. In her private correspondence with Dr. Fitzgerald, she theorized that Thompson had been part of a network of enslaved individuals who had preserved ancient African spiritual and medicinal practices. Her hypothesis suggested that the communion wine poisoning was not merely an act of revenge, but a ritualistic reclaiming of spiritual power. The investigation took a sinister turn when team members began experiencing health problems during the excavation. 3 graduate students working on the dig reported recurring nightmares featuring a tall, gaunt figure they identified as matching historical descriptions of Isaiah Thompson. Dr. Patricia Newman, one of the students, documented her experiences in a journal that was later found in her dormitory room after she withdrew from the program. Newman's journal entries describe dreams in which she found herself in the underground chambers, surrounded by figures in period clothing who appeared to be the poisoned plantation owners. In these dreams, the figures would force her to drink from chalices filled with dark liquid that tasted of metal and earth. She wrote, "They make me drink, and I understand their thirst. They died without communion, without redemption, and now they seek it eternally. But the wine they offer brings only knowledge of their suffering, and that knowledge burns." The excavation was abruptly terminated in February 1978, when Dr. Morrison suffered what medical records describe as a complete nervous breakdown during work in the main chamber. According to witness statements filed with the Beaufort County Sheriff's Department, Morrison began speaking in what sounded like multiple voices, claiming that they want to finish what was started. He was hospitalized at the Medical University of South Carolina Psychiatric Facility, where he remained for 6 months before being transferred to a long-term care facility. Dr. Hensley's final research notes, dated March 1978, suggest that she had begun to believe the poisoning case was connected to ongoing supernatural activity in the area. Her last documented communication was a letter to the Episcopal Diocese of South Carolina, warning them about continued dangers associated with communion services in churches built on former plantation grounds. She wrote, "The consecrated wine itself becomes a conduit for something that was awakened in 1802. Thompson did not simply poison his masters. He transformed the very act of communion into a curse that continues to manifest." Dr. Hensley disappeared on March 15, 1978, while conducting research alone at the St. Helena Church archives. Security guards found her car in the church parking lot the following morning, with her research materials scattered throughout the vehicle. A search of the church and surrounding grounds revealed no trace of her. The case was investigated by the Beaufort County Sheriff's Department as a missing person case, but no evidence of foul play was ever discovered. Modern investigations have revealed disturbing patterns that suggest the Thompson case continues to influence events in the region. Between 1980 and 2010, the South Carolina Department of Health documented 17 cases of severe poisoning associated with religious services in Beaufort County. All cases involved communion wine, and all occurred in churches built on sites that had historical connections to the antebellum plantation system. Dr. Robert Chen, a toxicologist at the Medical University of South Carolina who studied these cases, published a report in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2011 detailing the consistent symptoms experienced by victims. According to Dr. Chen's analysis, all victims reported experiencing vivid hallucinations featuring historical figures before losing consciousness. Blood tests revealed the presence of compounds that matched the arsenic-based poisons used in the original 1802 poisoning, despite the fact that the communion wine had been prepared using modern methods with commercially sourced ingredients. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports from surviving victims, documented in medical records at Beaufort Memorial Hospital. Multiple patients described encountering a tall, gaunt African-American man during their hallucinations, a figure who offered them knowledge of historical injustices in exchange for their participation in what he called eternal communion. Several patients reported that this figure identified himself as Isaiah Thompson and claimed that his work was not yet complete. The pattern of modern incidents follows a disturbing progression that mirrors the original case. Victims typically experience the initial poisoning symptoms during communion services, followed by a period of apparent recovery. However, within weeks of the initial incident, many victims report continued encounters with historical figures, particularly during sleep or meditation. Some victims have described compulsions to visit sites associated with former plantations, where they report feeling drawn to specific locations underground. Local law enforcement agencies have documented over 30 missing person cases since 1978, involving individuals who had previously survived communion wine poisoning incidents. In each case, the missing person's vehicle was found abandoned near historical plantation sites, with personal belongings undisturbed, but no trace of the individual. Detective Maria Santos of the Beaufort County Sheriff's Department, who has investigated these disappearances since 2005, notes that the pattern is too consistent to be coincidental, but the lack of physical evidence makes it impossible to determine what actually happens to these people. The most recent incident occurred in October 2023, when 8 members of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Hilton Head experienced severe poisoning during Sunday Communion. The church, built in 1998, sits on land that was part of the original Whitmore plantation. According to hospital records, all 8 victims reported identical hallucinations, featuring Isaiah Thompson, who allegedly showed them visions of historical atrocities committed on the plantation grounds. Reverend Michael Harrison, who served the communion wine, was also affected by the poisoning. His statement to police given after his recovery describes a terrifying encounter during his unconscious state. I found myself in what appeared to be the original St. Helena Church, but it was filled with figures from different time periods. Isaiah Thompson was standing at the altar, and he told me that every act of communion performed on cursed ground feeds the cycle. He said the 22 masters were just the beginning, and that the true communion would continue until the debt was paid in full. Scientific analysis of the communion wine from the 2023 incident revealed the same inexplicable results that have characterized all modern cases. Despite being prepared from sealed, commercially manufactured wine, the liquid contained compounds that matched the historical arsenic-based poisons. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the forensic chemist who analyzed the sample, stated in her report that the presence of these compounds violates known principles of chemistry and physics. There is no conventional explanation for how 19th century poisons could manifest in modern wine. The ongoing nature of these incidents has led some researchers to theorize that Isaiah Thompson's actions in 1802 created what paranormal investigators term a spiritual feedback loop. According to this theory, the combination of extreme injustice, ritualistic revenge, and consecrated religious elements created a permanent supernatural disturbance that continues to manifest through communion services performed in the affected area. Current residents of areas once occupied by the antebellum plantations report ongoing strange phenomena that appear to be connected to the Thompson case. Property owners near the former Whitmore plantation describe finding their wells contaminated with metallic-tasting water that tests positive for arsenic, despite no known sources of contamination. Local gardeners report that communion wine poured on the ground kills vegetation in patterns that resemble the layout of the original plantation slave quarters. The implications of the Thompson case extend beyond historical curiosity into active public safety concerns. The South Carolina Department of Public Health has issued advisories recommending that churches in Beaufort County use alternative communion elements or conduct services at locations away from historical plantation sites. However, many congregations continue traditional practices, either unaware of the historical connections or unwilling to alter centuries-old religious traditions. Recent developments have added new urgency to the case. In 2024, construction workers preparing the site for a new residential development near the former St. Helena Church discovered additional underground chambers similar to those found by Dr. Hensley's team. These chambers contained artifacts suggesting that the network of tunnels extends throughout the region, connecting multiple former plantation sites. The chambers also contained what appears to be an active shrine featuring items associated with communion services from various time periods. Chalices, communion wafers, and bottles of wine were arranged around a central altar, bearing carved symbols matching those found in earlier excavations. Most disturbing was the discovery of recent additions to the shrine: communion cups from the 2023 St. Mark's poisoning incident, arranged as if they were offerings. Isaiah Thompson poisoned 22 plantation owners with arsenic-laced communion wine in 1802. The official records state he was executed in 1803, but the evidence suggests that his true work was just beginning. The communion wine continues to run red in Beaufort County, and Thompson's promise of eternal justice remains unfulfilled. If you find yourself at a communion service in the South Carolina Low Country and the wine tastes of metal and earth, remember this: some thirsts can never be quenched and some debts can never be fully paid. The chalice that Isaiah Thompson raised in 1802 is still being passed, still claiming new participants in his eternal communion of justice and revenge.